Hello, everyone. Welcome to our latest edition of our Wired and Connected series. It's a series where we do interviews with leading figures in the TMT, in the technology, media, and telecom space. And I'm delighted for our second edition to have a really great guest with us, Vicky Sphere. I have to confess from the start that Vicky is an alumni of Evershed. She was with us in our Dubai office for a number of years. A great lawyer and a great people person. It was a big loss for us when she left, but since then she's had a spectacular in-house career that we'll touch on a bit later in detail. But currently she serves as the head of public policy for Twitter for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And I thought we could have a really good discussion about what she's seeing in her work. It's a fascinating area, very much in the news on various levels and various fronts and countries and across the board. So, Vicky, welcome to our show.
Thank you, Nasser. Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
It's a pleasure. Thank you again for agreeing to do this. First of all, Vicky, if we can start with your current role, and you've been in it for over a year, I believe, and in terms of what does it entail?
Of course. So I am the primary point of contact for any legal public policy matter for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So my role consists in advising and reviewing any proposed EU directive or national law if it impacts Twitter, and providing an assessment to the internal stakeholders at Twitter. But I also assist the public policy team in responding to consultations or hearing in relation to these proposed laws or directive. Essentially, this allows or enables cooperation and alignment between legal and public policy and define a common position.
Excellent. And what, I mean, it's a fascinating role. What would you say has been the most interesting aspect of your work?
Well, that's a good question. I would say there are a number of issues that we are currently seeing that deserve attention and are quite important, whether it's about content moderation, intermediary liability, or freedom of expression. These issues once again put the internet in the spotlight, and they highlighted how social media platforms are pivotal tools in allowing freedom of expression, but also providing access to users to information around the globe.
Yeah, well, this actually feeds into what I'd love to discuss with you most, actually. We'll get into social media regulations, which is a very hot topic in a tiny bit. But in terms of the trends you're seeing in the wider TMT space in your day-to-day, what would you say has been the most interesting, or what you've been witnessing?
I would say that the role and responsibility of online platforms are obviously a hot topic in media or policy or politic or even legal circles. I would say that the type of complaints directed against online platforms are changing. Typically, complaints were that we did too little against bad content. Now, complaints that we are intervening too much are becoming increasingly common. I think there is a support from the courts and parliaments allowing us to enforce our terms of use and rules, but there are also calls for more transparency around our processes in terms of service. I suspect that content moderation will be a hot topic in the upcoming discussions around the Digital Services Act.
Absolutely, that's coming up shortly. Just want to also start with something, that the real tragedy facing the world around the deaths and all of the damage caused by COVID-19, both in terms of health and the economy. I would just like to hear your sort of take on that and how it's affected your day-to-day work, both personally and for the company.
Yes, I would say, like any other business, unfortunately, Twitter is dealing with the effects of a health crisis that is unprecedented in severity and scope. We are faced with a deadly pandemic that has impacted all facets of our business, including operational aspects. So I think when you're facing with the impacts of that health crisis, our priority has been and continues to be to make sure that the people we work with are safe. From a policy perspective, in March 20, we did launch our COVID continuity policy that explains or that aims to tackle misinformation on our service, but also provide updates to users on the ongoing work we are doing with NGOs and other health organizations. I would say that the principles that guide our health or our policy are to make sure that our users are not impacted by disinformation, to make sure that we are also tackling harm and incentives, but also are focused on content removal when this is necessary.
I see. No, that's clear. I can see that you're working from home. I think Twitter and many others have made a lot of announcements around working from home and how long will it last. Do you see that being the policy for a long period to come with COVID and its effects?
Yes, definitely. I would say I am very privileged to be working in a company that looks after its employees, our safety, but also our well-being. COVID has shifted us from, I would say, our entire workforce into remote employees overnight, but it has not impacted our ability to do our business. One, I could say we were one of the first companies to be asked to work from home, and I think we're going to be the last to go back to the workplace. That's for sure.
That's very interesting. Well, Vicky, I think let's sort of roll up our sleeves and get into an area that's very close to my day-to-day work and is essentially the heart of what you do, social media regulations. I don't know where to start really, because it's such an active area. Various countries, I mean, in the Middle East have taken a lot of steps in terms of greater regulation. I know the EU is looking at revisiting some of its rules around that. The US as well, a lot of raging debate on that. But I think maybe if I could start with the social media regulation, if I could ask you to give us a brief survey or tour of the world in that sense, and if there are sort of practices or principles that you think are ideal in that space. I know it's a constantly shifting landscape, but are there certain principles or trends or countries that you feel are handling it particularly well?
Of course. I will start by setting the context here. Just to say that in large part of the world, online platforms benefited from some form of immunity, protecting them from direct liability for user-generated content surfacing on their platforms. What I would call these cornerstone rules, such as CDA 230 in the US, 15 e-commerce directive in the EU, has been or has allowed the internet to be the internet that we know today. And so with that in mind, we have been witnessing or seeing lawmakers talking about revising that concept. Some have been calling to decrease our immunity or attach it to very strict rules. Others have been saying that there is a need to revise or modernize these rules, but maintain the essential premise behind them. I would say, unfortunately, these debates have been highly politicized recently. From our standpoint, I would say that we would welcome any revision or reflection on the regulatory framework that we operate under. We do admit that the internet has changed drastically the past 2 decades. With that said, we have also been witnessing many laws that have been enacted that transform the way we have been operating or we continue to operate. So on that, we would say that it is essential to maintain cohesion, consistency, and make sure that there is no fragmentation, as we have been seeing that this wisdom behind this reflection have been varying from one place to another, and that's why we have been concerned with the fragmentation that we are seeing.
Yeah, I mean, because there's been a lot of debate on this issue. I mean, you mentioned the US position, and the EU position has generally been around a safe harbor for social media companies, where there's essentially no liability for the content provided or put online by third parties. I think you mentioned briefly the European Union. I believe under the Digital Services Act has launched a consultation in that space. Are you involved in that? Is this part of your work a bit?
Yes, yes. Thank you for asking. Yes, we have actually recently responded to the consultation around the Digital Services Act. So, as I mentioned earlier, from our standpoint, the EU safe harbor regime, I would say, has been foundational in the online ecosystem that we know today. It has enabled online platforms to innovate, to flourish, but it has also allowed users to express their views on diverse issues freely on the internet. It has also enabled them to connect with each other and use the internet as a forum for them to share the work they have been doing. So when we responded to the EU Digital Services Act consultation, we have said that whilst we welcome the reflection on these topics, it is very essential to maintain the safe harbor regime, and is also important to maintain the prohibition against online monitoring of user-generated content. If you want, I can provide few arguments here to support that position.
Please, yeah.
Of
If
course.
you could elaborate on that, yeah.
Yes, our view has been that it's essential to maintain this protection regime for various reasons. If we were to hold companies liable for user-generated content, companies, for fear of liability, might be incentivized to remove content that might be deemed legal after review. And because of the fear of liability that we face, we might be incentivized to do little or no review because we don't want to actually have to deal with that liability regime. But also one other thing that I would say here is that the process behind detecting the illegal nature of content is quite complex. It requires a revision of context that these automated tools do not detect, and that's why we might see more censorship of user content. One other thing that we've been hearing when we've had these discussions around the EU, I would call it Digital Services Act, so the DSA, is around the need to remove harmful content from the platform. And here, our stance has been that it is not up to us to remove harmful content, that if the legislator were to deem this content so harmful that it shouldn't be on our platform, that they should declare it unlawful. That's one of the things we've said, but also we have maintained the need to maintain the Good Samaritan clauses that enable us to do voluntary content moderation without facing any liability that arises from that. It is important that companies be given some sort of protection when they remove and decide individually to remove and detect content that is illegal. The last thing I would say here is that regulation should allow, I would say, innovative solution to societal challenges that we're seeing online and offline. So content removal should not be the sole paradigm of policy. I'm sure you have seen Twitter recently use other solutions such as labeling content, de-amplifying content that is harmful. We've also maintained that I would say political content should be earned, not bought, nor manipulated. And to us, these are more nuanced, harmonized solutions that might be sustainable on the long run.
Right. So you believe more in sort of active measures taken to ensure a safe environment, but essentially maintaining a very strong level of freedom of expression. I think, in terms of how I see it, I think there's this whole thing about should you regulate social media as publishers? And I actually think, to be honest, a lot of people, jump on that bandwagon because at a certain level, it may make sense. But on another, I think this notion of self-publishing, of essentially giving a platform to individuals around the world to basically unfiltered and without having to be sort of going through major publishers, etc., be able to express themselves, be able to say what they have on their mind has been absolutely incredible in terms of unleashing the sort of human expression of various forms, and without getting too much into it, but I think sometimes those who are requesting that you regulate social media as publishers it's kind of an easy but to some degree a lazy argument, because we have to see what social media has managed to do in essence in terms of allowing a variety of opinion, allowing a variety of views and sources of information to be available to people, when actually before, let's just, without getting too much into it, let's say media in certain jurisdictions or places was rather boring, and the ability of people to reach data or information was very limited. So I genuinely believe that that's been really good in terms of allowing people a platform to express themselves. But having said that, issues around terrorism, around indecency, or child pornography is a big issue.
True. And just to also build on what you were saying, um, if you were to assume social media as publishers, this is, I would say, a mischaracterization of the online world, but also how users use our platform. That's the first aspect of it. And so we cannot be considered publishers because that's not the way we operate. I mean,
but that's also in essence, it's not the same. Yeah.
we do not have editorial control over the content that is on our platform. And also when we talk about regulation, I mentioned earlier the process behind detecting the illegal nature of content and the need to have context. So to give you an example on that, you and I might be joking a lot, and a joke, I decide to text you to tweet, actually, not text you, and say, well, Master, when I see you, I'm going to kill you. Why did you do that? If you were to use the automated tool filtering here, then that content would automatically be censored. But if we look at the context deeply, or we look at it extensively, we could actually determine that it's a joke and that content is indeed legal and should be maintained on our platform. And I think these are the nuances that regulators did not take into account when deciding how to regulate social media platforms.
Yeah, I hear you. Now, in terms of terrorism, child pornography, things where humanity agrees without controversy in many cases, that you must stop that, you must control that. I mean, there was the horrific incident in Christchurch in New Zealand, which led to the Christchurch agreement, or the Christchurch Charter, and I think Twitter voluntarily acceded to that. So there is this notion, and that companies need to do a bit more that to make sure nothing that encourages terrorism, child pornography, acts of violence, that social media platforms are acting more aggressively against that. I know taking on a lot of steps in that space.
That's correct. I mean, to be very clear, we do not want to have that content on our platform. That is, I mean, there's no need for us to even go further on that. For terrorism and child sexual exploitation, just in a nutshell, our policies are very clear that this content is prohibited on our platform. We do invest in education, but also we do invest in tools that allow us to proactively detect that content and remove it as fast as possible. Whether with regards to terrorism or violent content, we also invested heavily in having tools that allow us to detect it proactively, but also if that content were to be published on our platform, to make sure that it is deleted before it's being republished on a wider scale. For CSE as well. And on these two issues, I would say that we have been partnering heavily with organizations that continue to guide us in our work and to help us find, I would say, more sophisticated tools to actually make sure that this content is not at all on our platform.
moving on, Vicky, I want to go on to the personal and look at your story. I like to use this series to give advice to young lawyers, young practitioners around the world who are starting out in their careers. Also, youngsters who may be considering studying law or not. And also, I mean, the shifting landscape around this, a lot of the changes happening to our profession, especially with technology and issues like that. So I wanted to start with your own story. I mean, take us through it, your career. How did you reach such a significant role at a very young age? And you take us through your journey and so far.
Well, just by background, I am French Lebanese. I studied law in both countries, and I've always been, I would say, inclined to travel and have a global role, I would say. I was very lucky to be in Dubai in 2006. I was very lucky to have actually started my journey in private practice by actually working with you as my manager for a long time. And I think you were, or Evershed has been the first law firm to introduce me to how online platforms operate globally, without mentioning names, obviously. And I think that shift has actually enabled me to take on a bigger role in-house. So as you are aware, I worked at Cummins, but then I was also lucky to work at Yahoo for around 3 years, I would say, where I have looked at various laws regulating the internet. At the time, it was about the Arab Spring and other challenges we were facing in the Middle East. And because I wanted to learn more about how US companies operate, I decided to do an LLM in the US at UC Berkeley. And that LLM, with my background, enabled me to take on that role at Twitter. I would say I have been very fortunate throughout my career to be working with people that have taught me a lot and also helped me take on and advised me along the way to be where I am today.
It's interesting, actually, in terms of advice, because actually in a previous episode of this, we talked a lot about this continuous need to educate yourself as a lawyer. I mean, I think things are shifting, things are changing with digital transformation, all these buzzwords we use, it's a reality. And we were saying how it's very important for organizations and for us as lawyers to put pressure on ourselves to continuously want to learn and improve. And something I've said in many sort of discussions, actually, that, for example, something like data protection is an area where I think any lawyer in any practice, anything they do, they need to become well versed in that, because that is such a massively important area of law that's not going away. That's one example. Also being savvy around technology and technology tools and how you can help your clients by picking up on certain tools. I think your story is a case in point in terms of your career. I mean, sort of, if we look at, the range of your career, but somewhere in the middle of it, you decided to stop and do an LLM. So I think that's a case in point about the need for continuous education.
That's true. And sometimes you need, I would say, to complement the experience with theoretical work behind
Yeah,
it and the philosophy behind the laws that have been enacted. I mean, that has been very important for me at UC Berkeley and instrumental in what I'm doing today. And one thing, you are right. I mean, when we talk with when we worked, when I was at Yahoo and Eversheds actually at the time where you were sponsoring the Law Without Walls program, and I took part in it. I would say that I was fascinated and surprised to remember how much progress that happened throughout my career that I was not privy to, and that I would actually need to remind myself that this is an ongoing thing, and the law changes overnight, and you need to be abreast of the issues that are gonna come your way. So I do agree with that.
absolutely. Any final words for young lawyers in terms of advice or, how to look at their career moving forward, or tips?
I would say hang in there. I know that we are all dealing with a crisis that is unprecedented.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I'm sure that has impacted a lot of lawyers that just finished law school. But I would say this, I mean, the issues that we are tackling require a new blood, require a creative and innovative mind, and that require, like we just mentioned, experience in dealing with these day-to-day issues. And I think this means that at one point we would need to rely on young lawyers to advise us and guide us throughout the way. Environmental challenges require a new skill set, I would say, and a new mindset that we would
Absolutely, yeah.
for, and as well as the technology sector. I mean, you see that the sophistication and how these young lawyers use online media will definitely be a learning thing for us that we could learn from and use in our day-to-day work.
I want to move on now to a related subject that I know is dear and important to both our organizations, diversity and inclusion. And I know you're very passionate about that as well. I mean, in terms of course, this is important to Twitter. What can you tell us about, I mean, how do you sort of live these values or apply them or try to take them forward in the organization? I know you're very active in that space.
Yes, I would say Twitter does obviously, diversity and inclusion is a priority for Twitter. One of the things that we keep telling ourselves is that in order to provide a better service, we need to look like the users that use our service. And so we have fascinating users from all around the world. We have diverse ideas on that platform, and it is essential for us to mirror that at the workplace. So we always believe that you need to bring oneself to work. And if you bring oneself with your diverse ideas to work, you'll be smarter for it. And so that we definitely cherish that and live it on a daily basis. I mentioned COVID shifting our workforce to working from home overnight. And as a result of that, it was very important for us to maintain the diversity and inclusion principles. So we created more connections, we created more groups, and that enabled us to continue to connect with each other and make sure we have allies at the workplace. One thing that we hear at Twitter is that diversity is a noun, inclusion is a verb. So in order to achieve diversity, you need to actively include people. And that's something that we do, we do cherish and apply on a daily basis in our work.
I wonder if you have thoughts on the issue of sort of women in leadership positions. That's something I'm, quite concerned about. I feel that, I'm not talking about particular organizations, but just across the board, the involvement of women in various parts of an organization are increasing. I'm seeing, the statistics, the trends are good, but generally in industry, in government, the number of women leaders or the percentage is not where we want it to be. So from your own experience as someone who has achieved so much and so early, what would you say, what are the elements that help women along the way or create the infrastructure that supports, having or getting more women to leadership positions?
I would say it's two things. It's definitely you need to have the proper legal regulatory framework in order to succeed. Obviously, be it when we talk about maternity leave, when we talk about or parental leave in general, that's something that is essential for a woman in order for her to be able to I would say juggle her personal life with the work life. Another thing that we say, I mean, I could talk about Twitter here. We do promote work-life balance, and that is essential. I don't feel constrained when I'm looking or have to leave work early to go and bring my son, for example, from school. And that is something that is very important to empower women to be themselves as well without having to worry about their personal life impacting their success at work. And I think the third thing that we need to keep in mind as well is to cultivate and have mentors around the place. My manager is a woman, so I feel connected to her in a sense that I know that another woman is feeling what I'm feeling, and that also helps you tackle day-to-day issues. So I would say mentorship, be part of women's group, and have allies. The more allies you have, the more chances you have to succeed.
Finally, I just wanted to move to away from the law. I know how passionate you are about law, about social media regulations, and many other areas of law. But outside of that, what are you passionate about, and or what are the things that drive you?
Well, I'm sure everyone who knows me knows how much I love animals. So typically, my cat would be with me in that interview, but for various reasons, I chose not to have her in the room. So I would say animals is my biggest passion, the welfare of animals. So in my free time, I try to advocate for that cause and to make sure that we limit, if not eradicate, animal cruelty in the world.
Absolutely. We just recently adopted a dog in our household, so it's quite it's a very enriching experience. Absolutely.
That's true.
Well, Vicky, thank you very much. That was really great, really wonderful having you with us. We'll let you know if we get any questions that we can take further, and maybe we'll host you again for round 2, as I think particularly the issue of social media regulations is not going away. And in the meantime, good luck to you and Twitter in this very exciting period where we're living in.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. And I hope I was able to translate in a concise matter what Twitter does in terms of these policies that we are facing. And please, if you have any other issues, feel free to reach out. And thank you once again for your time.
Thank you very much, Vicky. Thank you.